I'm really excited to do this presentation. Been hearing about Aurelia Ventures for a long time, and happy to be part of the process and the adventure. Just a few points before I jump in. As Felix said, we'll send you a copy of this presentation. I'm also in the Slack, so feel free to ping me at any time if you have questions on what I'm going to cover. I think we're a small enough group, so if someone does have a question in between, feel free to stop me and ask. Obviously, you want to try and get through everything in a timely fashion. There will be time at the end for questions, but like I said, if something's really not clear, please feel free to stop me. And yeah, so I'll jump right in. So what am I going to be covering? I estimate this is going to take me about 30 to 40 minutes. I'll try and speed up or slow down depending on how we go. It's quite a lot I want to cover in this. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is why should I really care about business intelligence for my startup? I have no idea like the stages of the companies that you guys are running, but I'm covering pretty broad spectrum here. So hopefully each of you will be able to take something from this. So obvious question, why should we even care about this? There's marketing, there's sales, there's product development, there's a lot that goes into building a startup. Why should we care about BI? Then I'm going to say, okay, now that we care about BI, I'm going to hopefully convince you all. Now it's like, how do we go ahead and build that data-driven business? I'm going to talk about BI on a budget. Some of you might be very early stage companies, resources are limited, maybe haven't raised any money yet. I'm going to give you some tips and methods on how to tackle your business intelligence for free or very, very cheap. Then talk about, assuming you've raised some money, you've reached product market fit, we're in the growth stage. How should we focus on business intelligence at this point? Talk about some of the big mistakes that almost every startup makes when it comes to BI. There's a nice bonus at the end for you, so stick around. And as I mentioned, there'll be time for some Q&A. So just a bit about me. Let's get that out of the way. So I've got about over 10 years of experience working in the tech world. I'm originally from South Africa, but immigrated to Israel, which all of you probably know is pretty big on technology. I'm also the founder of ProjectBI, a remote agency. We specialize in helping businesses become data-driven organizations. Work with SaaS and more recently focusing on e-commerce. I've worked with over 30 companies as a consultant, as a digital nomad, traveling the world. So been on the road for the last 3 years and worked with, as I mentioned, 30 companies, fully remote, everywhere from Latvia to South Africa to Israel to the US. Before I was a digital nomad, I was living in Tel Aviv and working for a company called Yotpo. They're pretty well known in the e-commerce space. I joined as the 12th employee. I was there for 4.5 years. Company today is worth $1.4 billion. A few hundred employees, and I established the BI team there. It was called the Business Performance Team. And my team and I were working with about 60 different decision makers on 3 different continents. I managed a team of business analysts, and it's a lot of fun, but decided to leave them and start my own thing. And that's what I've been doing the last few years. And as I mentioned, I'm originally from South Africa, if you're wondering what the accent's all about. And immigrated to Israel when I was 19 and lived there for 14 years before becoming a digital nomad. Cool. So jumping right into the meat of this presentation. So really, why should we care about BI? And I really like this quote. I have it on my website. In God we trust, all others must bring data. And really, I think it's a pretty obvious question today, as technology advances and we can track more and more things on the web. But if you're still struggling with this question, I kind of will pose it to you in this way. What kind of company do you want to build? Do you want to build a company which can say with confidence that our decision makers use data to help and guide their decision making? Or do you want to be the company that we're going to go with our gut? We're going to take a lot of chances. We're not going to it's basically the person that can make the strongest argument or have the better negotiating skills is going to help guide us, and not the person that can actually bring data to the conversation. Another way to kind of frame this is, if our competition is using data for decision making and we aren't, are we more or less likely to succeed in the market, right? So I like to think of business intelligence as a competitive advantage, especially if you do it well. The funny thing is, if you do it badly, it can actually hurt you, right? Because then you're making decisions on bad data, or you have a lot of resources going, down a black hole. But today, I think it's more and more important that you including business intelligence as part of your overall strategy. And I'm going to really help you to become more of a data-driven organization so you can start building up that competitive advantage. Now, when it comes to building business intelligence, a lot of people hear this term and it's up there with data science and all these like very broad terms. What does it mean? How does it work? It's a scary word to a lot of people. A lot of the leads I talk to for my business, they have no idea what it really involves. And fortunately and unfortunately, it's something which takes time, it takes resources. It's something which I umbrella under business intelligence. Really is part of the umbrella of business operations. So if you're really struggling with how should I focus and position business intelligence in my organization, think what and how you would approach, for example, your CRM or any other big piece of software which is touching many teams in your company. You're not going to look for a quick and easy solution. It's probably not going to be cheap, right? It's something you really got to focus on, build over time. And it means if you really want to be a data-driven organization, you've got to approach it like this. It's a long-term fundamental piece of the overall strategy. Another way to think about business intelligence, and this is what I often do when I'm talking with early stage companies that have certain challenges in the space, is think of it like a spectrum or like a scale, right? You might be at point A, typically a lot of work on Excel, a lot of gaps in data collection, really not sure what's going on in terms of product usage, lifetime value, very key things where there's very little understanding. And then you have point Z, right? It's all the way down the spectrum, the scale. And, companies like that would be obviously more mature and have invested, and years have gone by and they've built up this competitive advantage in their business, these assets, right? So I've linked at the bottom of some of my slides to certain blog posts that I've written. So ProjectBI is also a blog with over 60 articles that I've published over the last few years. And I basically wanted to tackle this challenge in a blog post, and I came up with this concept called BI Competency Status. It's basically this like gold standard that you want to try and aim for. So I've linked to this blog post, and I welcome you to read it. It's a long one, but it really covers that process from really going from point A to point Z. Now, you might be asking yourself, what does point Z look like, right? So basically, if you're at point Z or you've reached BI competency status, you're going to be able to check off all these boxes, right? So you've got a dedicated head of analytics. It's typically going to be a director or a VP. Some companies even have a chief data officer, right? So obviously it depends on the business. You can have a team of business analysts and data engineers which are serving the different departments in the company. You're going to have a data warehouse, so you've really built up the infrastructure, you've centralized your data, you have single sources of truth for all your KPIs, the metrics you care the most about. You're able to report on all these KPIs and really help decision makers in the organization move quickly and use data to run their day-to-day. You've got some form of self-service BI, right? So people can go and answer their own questions and work with the data. And really you've developed the culture, right? You've got that data-first mindset where before the marketing team initiate a campaign, they're thinking, what KPI are we trying to move here? How are we going to track the performance? What will be a successful campaign versus a failed campaign? And very much taking that, scientific, data-driven approach. So that's a lot, but don't worry. Throughout the rest of this presentation, I'm really going to try and help you get closer to point Z, right? So the way I've kind of structured this presentation is in two main parts, at least this, focus on how to kind of move down towards point Z on the spectrum. So this is the life cycle, the startup life cycle. Depending on where you are, you might be down here with just getting started. You've got an idea, you're building a prototype, an MVP, or you're in that long, tough journey of reaching product market fit that can take many years in some cases. Or if you're lucky, you've got enough proof that you've reached product market fit and now you're in the growth stage. You're probably trying to raise some money, or you've raised some money and now it's about building the rocket ship, right? So I'm going to break up my focus into two pieces. There's going to be up to product market fit and then post product market fit. It's a good way to kind of think about this challenge of really building out business intelligence. As I said, it's a long, tough journey. So I want to kind of simplify it for you, and we're going to first focus on the first part and then move on to, okay, great, you're a growth company. How do we tackle BI now? So starting with, reaching product market fit. If you're in the stages, you're very early on, you're trying to get to this point so you can raise some money. Your entire focus should be on proving that you've reached product market fit. So when it comes to BI, that's really what we want to do, right? We want to focus our attention. Resources are limited. What can I do using data to help us track and prove both to ourselves and to potential investors that we've reached this point, right? So there's lots of different ways to think about product market fit. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I could do a whole presentation on the topic, but one good question to ask yourself is, are enough of our users receiving adequate value from our service to keep them using the service indefinitely? If you've basically able to focus on answering that question and using data to prove it, then there's a good chance you've reached product market fit. There's different ways depending on the business, but it's really thinking about it in these terms. And as an analyst, I like zone in on the words that I've highlighted in green here. In enough of our users, so okay, we want to understand what that means, and then using it indefinitely, right? Now this really falls into product analytics. So when I'm working with a company that's pre-product market fit, a heavy focus is on product analytics, right? We obviously want to make sure enough users are coming in, right? So we'll look at things like Google Analytics, a bit on the marketing side, the marketing spend in terms of, the funnel around impressions, clicks, and that visitors to the website, because we want to make sure we don't have an issue at the top of the funnel. But fundamentally, we really want to focus on product analytics. And when it comes to answering the question of enough and using it indefinitely, it really boils down to retention analytics. So I've also covered this topic a lot on my blog. This is a screenshot from Mixpanel that I found on Google. This is a very classic cohort-based retention table visualization, very classic in product analytics. And what it does is it tracks different cohorts of users, which is the rows, right? So each row represents a group of users that join my service or use my product for the first time, right? So a user will only appear once in its relevant row. And then each column is going to be a period of time. This specific table is looking at daily retention. And when it comes to your startup, your business, you need to understand what makes sense. Facebook, for example, tracks daily active users. A service like Zapier might track monthly active users, right? It really depends on the service. A fitness app might care about weekly retention, because we don't need you to necessarily use it every day, but we do expect you to use it every week, right? A rule of thumb, I like to go with weekly. In most cases, it's typically good enough, but you've got to know your startup, your company well enough to know what makes sense. And then basically what you're going to do is you're going to build this either using one or two methods I'll show you soon, or a tool like Mixpanel that can give it to you basically out of the box. Now, once we've developed this, the next step is to build what we call the retention curve. Okay, this is another classic type of visualization. I've also a blog post on this topic. And what you really are looking for is for that curve to flatten out. So let me take a step back, right? This is grouped on a weekly or daily or monthly, whatever we're doing, cohort basis. This is going to take the average, right? So every week, we're going to get data here, but we're going to combine that into this, which is going to be your retention curve, which shows me the percentage of users that are sticking around as time goes on, right? And we want to look for when that curve flattens out. In this example, it flattens out at 40%. So how do we read this? It basically means that after 4 weeks, around 40% of our users are still using our product. And as time goes on, they continue to use it, right? If this line continues down to the y-axis, to the x-axis, then it basically means over enough time period, no one's stuck around. It means your churn rate is very high and people are not using you indefinitely, right? Now, a lot of companies can actually get away with a very low flat line. It could be 10%, right? A lot of freemium companies, if you think about it, right? They might have 100 people sign up for free and 10%, 10 of them end up paying and using it long term. And you can build a very successful business on that, right? But the trick is that it's got to flatten out. Now, if you do have it flatten out, great. You probably have product market fit. Then the next job is to move that up, right? You want to move that line up. How do you do that? Once again, we're going to be tracking it every time a new product update comes into place. You can look for a new cohort and see if the numbers have moved. I have a client right now that's pretty early stage. They're making very big changes to their product. Every other month, the numbers look completely different. It's like having a different business. So it is important to track this over time and be able to see, after every 2-3 weeks of a big product change, are the numbers improving or dropping? It gets really, really interesting. Now, how do we get this, right? So I mentioned Mixpanel. I'm a very big fan of Segment. They're the ones that are actually going to pipe the data into Mixpanel. And the good news is you can use both these tools for free. Obviously, it depends on the size of your company and the stage. If you've got a very good marketing organization bringing you a ton of users, then the costs will start going up because a lot of these tools base their pricing on number of monthly tracked users in the case of Segment. Mixpanel has a very good freemium model, but there's a lot of limitations. But once again, you can get the cohort reports as part of the freemium and a few other reports they'll give you out of the, as part of the free plan. I also know that Aurelia Ventures has a partnership with Segment. So if you haven't taken on Segment, talk to Felix. I'm sure he can help you out.
And Mixpanel, by the way. So both partnerships.
Okay, right.
Right. So.
Yeah. The question you might be asking me, okay, Justin, great, I understand, but what do I do now if my retention sucks, right? So you haven't got that flattened out line. What do we do next when it comes to the BI? And something I do basically for all my early stage clients is what I call the core funnel, right? The core funnel cohort table. So now I take a similar approach, but what I want to do is map out the core funnel of the startup, right? So I've created for you an example to kind of think through this together. So let's just imagine you running a fitness app, right? And you've got to think, what is the main funnel, the core funnel of this business? Let's just assume it's a mobile app in the fitness space. People can sign up and do workouts on the app. It's a SaaS product, so there's a trial and you subscribe, there's a trial, and you end up paying on a monthly or annual basis. So that's the example I want to use, right? So what I'll do as the analyst in this company is I'll map out that core funnel. Often the founder, the CEO, whoever's leading the company should know this. They might not have put it on paper, but they fundamentally know this. And then I'm going to start building that funnel, right? So in this case, the first step is really, we're going to look at number of users, because as I mentioned before, we want to make sure enough is coming in for us to even bother, right? If I've got 10 users signing up every week, you can't do analytics. It's just not enough. You're going to have statistical biases and sampling size issues, and you can't do anything, right? As an analyst, you have to have data. If there's not enough data, we've got to get the marketing team to get their act together and get enough coming in, right? After that, what's the next step? Very common, finish the onboarding, right? So think where users can kind of drop out and never come back. So if the onboarding process is going to be a key step in the core funnel. Next, for a fitness app, it's going to be did a workout, right? That's the fundamental value. That's what I call the wow moment, right? How many of our users are reaching the wow moment? Because if they don't reach the wow moment, you're not going to stick around. They're not going to use it. And then, whoops, just want to move this. Next step, whoops, Start a trial is going to be the next step in our process, and then lastly, paid. You might also want to add to this that they pay us the second time, right? Because sometimes if you've got you're good with setting up the product in some ways, you can get them to pay, but then they're not getting enough value and they end up canceling, right? So it's also good to know how many people pay more than once, especially if most people pay on a monthly basis, right? So you're going to map this out. And after we got the absolute numbers, it's always good to turn into a cohort percentage-based view. And then we can start analyzing our core funnel, right? So you can see here with some of the conditional formatting that only around 50%, but higher of our users are doing a workout, right? So most people finish the onboarding. We don't have an issue there, but then we're losing 40 to 50% of our users, right? So it's very clear what the issue is with this company is a huge percentage of people are dropping off. They're never actually experiencing that wow moment. So if your retention is bad, right, you're probably struggling to get enough people to actually reach that point. Next, start a trial and paid. You can see the gap between each of these steps is pretty small. So if we take, for example, the first line, 57% started a trial, 44% of all the users, 57% did a workout, 44% of users out of all the users started a trial, and 38% of them paid, right? So in this case, most people that did a workout, they're also starting a trial, and most people that start a trial also paying. So the end of the funnel is healthy. We don't have an issue there. The problem is in that middle section where people aren't doing a workout, right? So I would focus on that, and then you'll start to see more people are seeing the wow moment. More of the ideal customer users are experiencing the wow moment, and that's going to boost your retention. So you might be thinking, wow, Justin, this is crazy. It looks good, but how do I build this, right? And once again, I'm talking to a company here that's pre-product market fit. I don't expect you to have analysts. I don't expect you to have a big budget. But what you will have is a developer. You will have a CTO of some form, someone that's built your product. These engineers, they know SQL because they need to know to build whatever product you're building, right? So I've given you an example here of the data set that needs to be built, right? So you're going to have one row per user. You're going to have the date field, right? So you can put them in the relevant, cohort. And then you're just going to have ones or zeros is if they did something, right? So you could go to your CTO and say, listen, I need a table like this. And then once again, you don't have to spend any money on this. Once you've got the CSV file that they should be able to provide you, you can sit on Excel, you could do a pivot table. If you want to get a bit more sophisticated, Google Data Studio is a great first option, also for free, part of the Google toolbox, and you're good to go. So really, if you're pre-product market fit, don't bother hiring me, don't bother spending any money. You should be able to answer these things yourself. Where it gets tricky is, once again, really being able to understand this funnel for yourself, understanding how do we move and manipulate the numbers. And this is not the easiest question to always answer depending on the product. But in terms of getting to this stage, you shouldn't have to worry about spending any money. Okay, so that's the pre-product market fit. Let's move on. How are we doing for time? Not too bad. BI and the company lifecycle. So talking now about the growth stage, right? Now, this is a very big topic. I work with companies typically many months during this stage because it's a never-ending thing. You're adding more teams, you're adding more data silos. It gets more and more complex over time. We want to do predictive analytics. There's a lot that goes into this point. But what I want to focus on is giving you kind of the starting point and giving you a bit of a framework to use to start moving towards that point Z, as I referenced earlier. Right, so this is basically out of the playbook of ProjectBI, a three-phased approach. Phase one, foundational. Phase two, turning on the lights, and phase three is mastery. It's a good way to kind of focus on structuring the first 6 to 12 months, let's call it, of your efforts to build out your BI as a growth stage company. Each of these are basically two main building blocks. Phase one, By the way, I'm also assuming you've raised some money and everyone's, happy that you've had your champagne, and we're now ready to throw money at the problem like most SaaS companies do at this stage. Once again, there has to be some budget if you want to build out BI, right? It's not something that comes cheaply. Okay, so first step, you really need to bring in a head of analytics. Either hire an individual or work with someone like myself or another consultant that can kind of fill in that role and build out the strategy and take ownership over this. I've got also a lot of blog posts on how to hire such an individual, how to build their onboarding program, etc. That's the first big piece. So once that person's in the company, their first goal really should be getting feedback, creating organizational alignment. It's an umbrella term for a lot of different things. It comes down to what do we care about as a company, right? So what are the goals for the next quarter, the next 2 quarters, the next 12 months? Who is responsible for what, right? Often companies will have 5 people all saying, this is how many leads we had this month, right? 5 different numbers, 5 different data sources, right? There needs to be an alignment. There needs to be one main person who's responsible for owning these numbers and reporting on them, right? Comes down to this drawing up a data dictionary, right? So we're all speaking the same language. What exactly is a lead? What exactly is a user, an account, whatever the business is, right? Every company has its own like dictionary of terms, but everyone has their own variants of it. So once you've got that, the next stage is really about infrastructure, right? We've got to do a gap analysis. We've got to put in the right tools like Segment to fill in certain gaps. We've got to understand what R&D is providing us and what they aren't providing us. And then it's very much, okay, we know the gaps, let's start centralizing everything. We need a very robust, centralized data silo, that the company can use for all of its operational needs, right? This is typically called a data warehouse. Companies also go in the direction of a data lake and then often a data warehouse on top of that. There's different models, but you do want to have that. You can't really move without that. Next, implement reporting. So now we've got all the data in one place. Now it's a matter of getting some reports going, right? There's amazing tools like Tableau, Power BI, and others today, which can connect to numerous different data warehouses. You can build reports relatively quickly, often in a self-service manner, and then they're just going to auto refresh. And the managers, they just come in the morning with their coffee, open up their dashboards, and they know exactly what's going on. And that's a big, big piece of this. Next, once you've got that, and often even beforehand, you need to start scaling up your human resources. You've got to start building out a team of business analysts. Depending on which direction you want to go, you might want to hire data engineers, start moving certain things in-house, writing your own code to manipulate the data. And once again, I was in that position at Yokpo. You want to have enough buy-in and support from the leadership to be able to do this at scale, right? As the company grows, every 10 new managers should probably have a new analyst, right? You need to keep the ratios pretty well off so that you don't end up paying catch up. And now you're in a death spiral because the company is growing faster than the BI can keep up, and it becomes a nightmare. So that's a big part of this as well. And then lastly, I would say, just as part of this initial kind of focus, the first 6 to 12 months, start working on the culture, right? You need to have analysts which are both technical and good with people. I used to joke with my analysts that they're like diplomats and special agents at the same time. They've got to know how to deal with people, deal with office politics, but also be specialists in what they do, if it's writing queries to talk to the data warehouse or building reports. It's not easy to hire good analysts because it's a very multifaceted role in the company. Now, in terms of the infrastructure, because I know a lot of you are kind of running through this in your head now. Okay, I can bring in an analyst, no problem. I can be the initial head of analytics, not an issue. What do we do about infrastructure? How much is it going to cost us, etc. Something I've basically specialized in through, ProjectBI, my agency, is helping early stage companies set up their infrastructure very, very quickly, very, very cheaply. Luckily, the BI tech has really got to an incredible point where for literally a few $100 a month, you've got automated flows to pipe in your data. You've got cloud-based auto-scaling data warehouses in something like BigQuery. And then you've got tools like Tableau, which thankfully they've just improved their license policy. And now for less than $1,000 a year, you're able to start building and using their platform, and they're, you know, the market leader in the space. I've got Redash over here. This is like this is a screenshot from a blog post I wrote about a year ago. They were acquired, so I'm not exactly sure if they're still around. But Mixpanel and Redash would be examples of self-service BI. So just cheap, and anyone can kind of you know add users, and people can go in and start answering their own questions. So yeah, check out that blog post, Ultimate Analytics Stack for Startups. It's a bit outdated, but a good place to start. And as I said, this stack is around $200 per month, right? So if you imagine I go to a client, you know, they're already paying me a lot of money. They're now very hesitant to take on more expenses in infrastructure. And this is what I've got. This is kind of the Justin stack for startups. Cool. So I really hope that part was interesting. I guess maybe, Felix, we can just stop here for just 2 minutes if anyone has any questions before I kind of move on to the last section of the presentation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Justin. We can do that either in two ways. Either you're, just unmute yourself and basically ask questions, or you basically put something in the chat box and I can read them obviously for everyone. Whatever you feel more comfortable with. Don't be shy. You can ask straightforward, right? Just this year, because we have very interesting mix of companies, between B2B, B2C, obviously, some SaaS business as well. And then Tyler obviously has multiple business units, which, might have, need for BI. And so, yeah, if anyone has any questions, shoot now. Otherwise, obviously, we have after the presentation time for that as well. And you can obviously write as well already ongoing in the chat box. And so we can calculate them there.
Yeah, and also in about 10 minutes, there's only around 10 more minutes, I'd say even less, of content before Q&A. So yeah, so it's coming up, but I did want to just have a break with some water. So if anyone does have any questions. Anyone?
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Nima.
I have a problem with the video, so I can't. I don't know. You still hear me? Like
Yes.
It shows. It's fine. Okay. So thanks, Justin. Can you go back to the slide about the cost?
This slide here. Yeah.
So I mean, comparing this slide with the previous slide that was about like the setting and then the scaling part. Can you go to this one? So no, next one. Yeah, and next one. So this one and the next one. So can you kind of like compare which parts of the service, which company do you recommend, and then what would be the cost in each stage? Because I understand you said that the price is like $200 per month, but I guess that's too low for like having all these services, right?
No, so it's really not. I mean, but it's a good question. Let me maybe expand on that a bit. So if we go back to this slide, as I said, the pre-product market fit stage, where is it now? Did I go? Yeah, sorry, over here, right? So if you're in that part of the journey, you really shouldn't be spending any money, right? Like I said, cut corners, work with your developer, your CTO, and get the data, work with Excel, Google Sheets, because I know, I think Google, now with Microsoft, you need to buy a license for Excel, but really don't spend any money on this. And once again, everything's relative. If you've got a lot of users, Segment will give you up to 1,000 monthly tracked users for free. So if you've got less than 1,000 people logging into your application every month, you can use it for free. It will be the data pipeline to get the data into Mixpanel. And Mixpanel you can also use for free. I think it's also up to like 1,000 users a month or something like that. It's been a while since I've checked. But you shouldn't need to worry too much. In terms of this stack, this is typically the stack I implemented with my clients, and they could be all the way at pre-product market fit, all the way to post-Series A. right? So typically, once the company's mature enough where they're not going to work with me, they're going to bring in their own head of analytics. Then they might start deciding, okay, you know what, I don't want to have to outsource the entire, you know, infrastructure to services. I want to start bringing things in-house. Maybe they don't want to use BigQuery anymore because they use AWS, so they'll shift over to Redshift, which is AWS's data warehouse, etc. Right? But when I say 200 a month, I'll kind of walk you through how I get to this number, right? So if we're starting on the left-hand side, Google Analytics for free, Postgres is kind of just an example of your data, the database for your application, and then Segment, right? Once again, up to 1,000 monthly tracked users for free, right? So I'm assuming you're early enough where you're not paying them. Stitch, which is going to help move all the data over, is $100 a month. At the time of writing this, it was free, up to 5 million rows a month, but today it's $100 a month. So that's where I get 100 of the 200. And then Tableau, okay, then we get to BigQuery. BigQuery is very, very cheap. You're looking at a few dollars a month, depending on the size. If you, once again, if you've got, you know, massive amounts of data, you're a B2C gaming company or whatever, it's going to scale, but you're dealing with a few dollars a month. I had a client with, I think it was 5 to 10 million rows coming in every month. They're paying $50 a month for BigQuery. So it's very, very cheap. Then Tableau, all my clients, they start with one license, which is $840 a year. So that comes to 70 a month, right? So if you take 100 plus 70, and then I'm just assuming a bit here and there for BigQuery and maybe a Redash license or something like that. So early stage, you don't have a ton of volume. You've maybe pre-series A, but you've reached product market fit. This stack is great and it'll be very, very cheap. Now, once again, if you've got 50 people in your company, you're going to need more Tableau licenses. But even then, you're talking about $15 a month per license, per license paid annually. So it's very, very cheap today compared to what you used to pay. So this is typically the stack I go with my clients because it's so cheap. And Stitch, by the way, has connectors to, I think it's 250 services, everything from Shopify to Google Analytics to Facebook ads. You can pipe all that data into BigQuery and do it, you know, huge volumes for $100 a month. It's an amazing solution. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. And as I said, there'll be some time at the end if anyone else has any additional questions. So I wanted to kind of cover this because as an analytics consultant, it's irritating to see this over and over again. So I want to kind of help you guys avoid some of these mistakes. Almost every company I deal with has made at least one of the three mistakes I'm going to cover. So don't do these. The first one is really maybe not intuitive, but a lot of companies think they're doing a good job when it comes to data collection, but they aren't actually collecting historical data, right? What I mean by that is, as an analyst, there's only so much I can do with static data or a snapshot data, right? So there's a very good example I like to use, and you can see in the slide, there's a picture of like a button, right? So just imagine for a second in your application, you have a feature and someone has to click a button to enable the feature, right? So if there's any developers on this call, they know in order to show the user that the feature is on, all I need is to save in the database a 1 instead of a 0, right? A Boolean indicator that the feature is on. Now, as an analyst, that's not helpful for me because I can tell right now if the feature is on. What I need is event data. I need data every single time person turns on or turns off the feature. What happens if someone turned it on and then turned it off? So right now, if I'm not saving historical data, I don't know that they turned it on. So you're creating a gap in your data. And especially if you're pre-product market fit, you need to be able to know adoption of your features and usage, right? So a tool like Segment is amazing here because if you implement that early on, you just get into the habit that anything we want to track, we build it into the code, we communicate that event to Segment, that event is being sent to our data warehouse, and we know every single moment in time that we care about, right? If someone's turning in a feature or etc. Just came to mind a tool like Stripe, which is very popular. Stripe is very good at this. They give you a lot of data because they were built by engineers and they understand the importance of very granular data. Make sure you're recording events either through a tool like Segment or in your own database, right? Don't just save changes. You need to do that anyway, but make sure you're saving historical data. The second mistake, which is also very common, I actually talked to a company this past week, which, was very frustrating, is a lot of businesses see BI as like a plaster, right? A pain point comes up. Oh my word, an investor wants to know our lifetime value. I don't know what that number is. Let's bring in a consultant, let's bring in an analyst. We need to know this question. As I hope I've explained to you, this is a much broader, longer term process of moving from point A to point Z. You can't really treat BI as a plaster. There are certain things you can do in your company. If it's launching, a paid marketing, campaign on a new network, that might be a short-term solution to drive up your traffic. There aren't really any good short-term solutions. With that being said, I did show you one or two ways to cut corners and do things on the cheap. But once again, you're doing that assuming you can then implement a much more robust, longer term solution. And you're doing that because you need to know the information now. As you get old, as the company matures, you need to think more long term and do things properly. So don't treat BI as a plaster. This is also a good quote here, that there's always an easy solution to every problem, neat, plausible, and wrong. Right? So if you always think, okay, what's the easy solution here? You can often do it wrong, right? Okay, so this is as well, I've got some first-hand experience with this, is once you've reached that product market fit and you take my advice and you decide you're going to hire a head of analytics, that person is very, very important, has a very, very important role in the company. He's essentially needs to build a layer across the entire organization to make everyone more effective, right? If you're going to set up that person to fail by not supporting their efforts, by not getting buy-in from the management, not supporting them as the CEO, the COO, which is often the case, those are going to be typically the people responsible for hiring this position, then that person's just going to be, he's not going to be able to move, he's not going to be able to get anything done. It needs to be a top-down decision, and it needs to be communicated to the organization that this is what we're doing. We're bringing in this person. He's got my backing as a CEO to get things moving and changing this company for the better. That's the kind of conversation you need to have. Same thing goes with budget. As I've explained, if you give this person budget for one analyst and you've got an organization of 100 people, it's not going to work. He's going to get frustrated. He's going to end up leaving, because no matter how good he's doing his work, his job, he's not going to be able to succeed because he doesn't have the resources needed to make that transformation. Okay, so here's the bonus. Want to really thank all of you for joining. And basically just offer each of you for joining this a free session with me. Here's a link to my Calendly. This will also be sent to you. As I mentioned, I'm also in Slack, so feel free, if needed, you can ping me sometime tomorrow. It's getting quite late in Vietnam, but ping me and I'll be happy to schedule. You can use my Calendly, schedule time that works for you, and happy to hear some of your challenges and help you think through how to address them. So that's it. Thank you very much. Now's the time for any questions. And yeah, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Justin.
So much, Justin. Really, really
Pleasure.
great. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think we should just keep it very open-minded. And so in case anyone has a question, just unmute yourself and ask the question, and then I think that's the easiest to proceed. So I see Nima already first row, already unmuted. So I stopped talking. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. So is this working just once you have sales, or you can do that before having sales as well? Because like in our case, we are just testing the waters in different markets, because it's like a product that can be applied in several verticals, and we haven't had a sale. So can we still use this type of analytics, or we have to wait until we have customers and then build that funnel?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's, if I understood you correctly, you're kind of in that very early stage, right? Where you're trying to find the right, it's almost like the product, the market research phase, right? So you're very much in the early stage of the journey.
So
right?
we do. So we have completed an MVP that can be used or applied in different verticals. Now we are testing the waters or testing the market to see which vertical or which industry can benefit more from our product, and at the same time, which is the best fit for us. Like which one is the low hanging fruit for us. So we are kind of like in the second part or second section, which was product market fit and language market fit, but before having sales.
Yeah, so I would say I definitely think BI is relevant, but once again, I would be very, very focused. I don't think you need to build a very robust setup, but you do have very key questions you need to answer, right? And you need to have data to help support them. So depending on the product, you might want to do something like I've got on the screen here, some kind of usage or retention or funnel-based approach where something like this maybe where you have number of phone calls, number of people that answered the phone, number of demos scheduled, and you group that by the market or the industry that you're targeting. And after enough time, you're getting enough data where you can then say to the company, okay, we've tested 5 geographies, and by far Northern Europe converts at a much, much better rate than Southern Europe, right? Or the US or whatever the geographies are. And I wouldn't even call that necessarily BI. I mean, it is BI, but it's hyper-focused. It's really answering 1 or 2 very specific questions. So I do have a blog post on funnels and funnel analyses. You basically need to decide what is the exact funnel, what would be success for us. So that's also very important here. What numbers would we like to see? And if we see them, then we know it's a successful target industry, and then kind of work backwards, right? So maybe it's number of sales. So it's okay, how do we get to the sale, right? There's a funnel there, and map that out. And then it's probably a lot of manual work, so spreadsheets and stuff like that, but it's still business intelligence. You're just doing it in a hyper-focused, low-budget way. And then once again, I don't have enough information, but if you're using a CRM, something like HubSpot or Salesforce, something like that, then I would look at the reports that they offer you out of the box, and then make sure you're using the tool correctly. And then you often can do all that kind of analysis within the tool itself.
Right. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Nima, obviously, Justin, maybe very interesting and following up there on Nima's question is, when you look at the 2 stages, one is very early and one is more on the growth stage. You obviously put right now Data Studio more on the early stage, and Tableau and other data BI tools basically on the more later stage tools. Would you say there's something more in the early stage where you say, hey, Data Studio really works well because you connect analytics there, what you normally run on your website anyways. You can connect some other data source and everything. It's fairly easy to use, and for Tableau you need something like an analyst to really just set it up. So it's basically on the kind of complexity you use it.
I mean, for me, it's really mainly around budget constraints, typically, right? So Excel, Google Sheets, Google Data Studio, all either free or very, very cheap. And once the company indicates to me that they've got some form of budget, then I'll typically start pushing this stack, just because it's not free, but it's cheap enough. And once again, in the hands of someone like myself, the tools can provide massive value. I mean, I've got a client in Israel. We've got about 10 different dashboards I've built just around product analytics. I mean, it's insane what a company that's pre-Series A can know about itself, because it's working with me and able to kind of collect the right data and then show it in a tool like Tableau. And the CEO today is, every board meeting, he's opening up Tableau and using it, and they're already, pre-Series A very data-driven company. So once again, the good news is that companies can use better technology today than they could years ago because the prices have dropped. But like you said, it does get more sophisticated. So setting up this stack would be tough for someone with no experience. But honestly, someone that would sit, a day or two and really get into the details, read some articles like I've referenced, and they could probably get a lot of this up and running themselves.
Thank you so much. Anyone else has any questions? For example, like without giving obviously any big insights into the companies who joined today, but we obviously have a company which works very a lot on basically IoT analytics, so basically on hardware analytics, and obviously on the same way on e-commerce analytics. Because obviously we speak a lot about software here right now, and AI and these kind of things and databases. But when you would kind of like to measure, for example, hardware utility, for example, before a product goes to another owner, for example. Would you do exactly the same tech stack? Is there anything maybe different for hardware companies?
Yeah, it's a bit tough for me to answer that because I just don't have any experience of working with such companies. But really, the fundamentals of business analytics are very, very similar, no matter what. So I've worked with, as I mentioned, a lot of companies. A lot of them, almost every one of them is different to the next, right? I've worked with crypto, with fitness, with wearable devices, but the concepts, the idea of funnels, the idea of cohort analyses, the idea of segmentations, of retention, a lot of the fundamentals are especially around, product analytics. If you think about marketing, no matter what the company is doing, you're still all kind of doing the same thing. It's impressions, it's getting the company in front of more people, right? It's conversion rates, landing pages. So when it comes to the hardware company, I would say, the tougher thing is, what do we really care about? Is that clear? And then do we have access to that data? And then typically it's easy, right? You give me access to a database or a spreadsheet with the right data, I would be able to answer those questions. But the harder thing is, do we know what we really need to track and care about? And then next, do we have any gaps? Can we get our hands on all the relevant data? And then once again, someone with relatively basic understanding of analytics and business analytics in particular will be able to start answering the questions. Pivot tables, funnels, right? It's not super complex. And a lot of the tools like Excel can really help you get it quickly.
Thanks so much. Okay, I see the first people already. Oh, so yeah, sorry guys, first of all, for running a bit over time. So some people already needed to leave because next meetings are starting. Dennis, maybe something for you. I'm checking right now. If nobody else has questions, I would just obviously, Justin, thank you so much for everything. Really, really great. Nima, it looks like you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have one last question. So generally, like the tool and the process, is it same among like B2C and B2B, or do you have like different strategies for the two sides?
Honestly, it's very similar. As I mentioned before, the fundamentals are typically there. Often what you do end up dealing with is just higher quantities of data with B2C. So typically, if you think like a fitness company, it can only really grow and succeed if it's got hundreds or thousands of people signing up, especially if it's a freemium. B2B is typically, higher lifetime value. And, you can get away with much lower conversion rates, right? So I might be a Zapier and I have thousands of people signing up, but I only need really 5% of them to end up paying me because retention is good and lifetime value is good. So you do, as an analyst type, start running into certain problems around big data. So you can get some really complex analyses where the volume of data is just so much that things can get slow and it's much tougher to work with the data. But even then, it's usually takes a long time to get to that point. And if the company is that, it's almost like a good problem to have. And then typically the company will start shifting into building their own teams in-house and deal with better tech around big data and data engineers and data scientists and kind of go that route.
Right. And just one last question. So based on your experience and and you are the numbers guy, right? So how much have you increased the performance or optimized the performance of the companies that you have worked with on average? Like,
Yeah,
okay.
That's a good question. The truth is, it's probably one of the most frustrating things as an analytics consultant to deal with, because so much of it is it's difficult to put numbers to it. You know, if a company, for example, didn't know its retention, and now it knows its retention, and it succeeds to now raise $1 million, does that mean I have credit for $1 million? I don't know. It's very, very difficult to do that. This is one of the reasons I'm now focusing on the e-commerce space, because it's much easier to kind of connect the dots and pinpoint to very specific things, because it's a much more of a traditional type business, e-commerce, in terms of, you know, you're dealing with customers and purchases, and you know, with SaaS, you often have a lot of funny things going on, right? Where the company is spending a lot of money and very low conversion rates, and it could be losing money for many years. So now it's like, okay, like the company's not even making money. How can I show that I'm improving it? But they're now moving quicker, right? And also what's also funny is I might help the company get so efficient that it's now saving the need to hire more people, right? Because everyone's now just a lot better at their job because they can make better decisions. But they're not going to tell me how much money they didn't spend on hiring this year, right? So that's another kind of thing that comes up. It's very difficult to quantify BI, but often a company, especially early stage, it can't actually move forward without BI. So it's almost like, especially for an early stage, it's like everything, right? Because you can't raise money if you can't give real numbers to sophisticated investors. A lot of companies work with me just before they want to raise money to actually help them build the deck to like communicate their numbers to investors. So yeah, I wish I had a number because it would make it easier to market myself, but unfortunately it's not. I just kind of rely on a big enough pain that they end up finding me almost, and like, okay, please help me.
Right. Thank you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, Justin, obviously, thank you so much for helping all of us today. Really, really insightful. Really thankful that you obviously took time for us. And for everyone else who's still in the call, I'll say we're going to send out everything tomorrow. So, you know, you're going to have the link of Justin, you know, please, you know, book additional time with Justin. And yeah, I hope everyone has a fantastic evening, fantastic start in the day, wherever you are. And then, yeah, see you all on Slack and the next meetings. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Felix. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
See you.
Thanks, Nima.